Welcome back to After Class. In today's episode, I'm chatting with Mary, a university professor who decided in her 30s to chase her dream of dancing professionally. After stepping away from dance for years, she returned to the studio and the stage with courage, creativity, and a brand new perspective on what it means to dance as an adult. In this episode, Mary and I talk about something so many adult ballet dancers wrestle with, but rarely discuss: that nagging sense of, if I'd only started sooner. We explore why so many of us feel this way, the power of reframing your perspective on starting late, and how embracing your own timeline might just be your superpower. If you've ever wished you'd started ballet sooner or regretted the timing of your journey, I've been there too. And this conversation is for both of us. Let's get into it.
I always wanted to be a dancer, and that was like my dream. And when I was maybe 11, my parents got me like canvas ballet shoes, and I had to sew the ribbons on, and a VHS tape of David Howard's master class. And I watched the heck out of that master class in my living room and just like my little chair as my bar. And I wanted to dance so bad. And I think there was a day, probably the last time I ever sat on my mom's lap, I just like started bawling my eyes out. I was like, I'm never going to be a professional dancer. And I don't know if this is just the way I remember it or if this is what really happened, but she found a studio in like another town to drive me to. And so we would go once a week, and that's what we could afford to do. But I loved it, and I started assisting in the classes so that I could like get more classes. And I just went to the owner and I was like, can I help in exchange for more classes? And she said yes. And so that ended up being like such a great decision because down the road, I'm still a teacher. I teach at the University of Kentucky, completely unrelated to dance. But when I was 16, I moved to a big city, Lexington. It's like 300,000 people, which is where I live now. And I went to a pre-professional ballet program. But I loved ballet so much, but I had a hard time adjusting. Like it was really, really hard. The teacher was very, very strict. She made me cry every day. She was like from the Soviet Union. Her name was Gulan Takabast. And she was just like all the stories you hear about like a mean ballet teacher, like that was her. And I knew she cared, but like I like had lost a friend that fall, and like I was just in a really dark place. And the next year they wanted us to bump up to 5 days a week. And I was working part-time to pay for the classes, and I had this eating disorder, and I just decided not to go back. And so I quit. It was my senior year of high school. And I was doing musical theater and like community theater-y stuff. But then after high school, I had just kind of decided that these things were somewhat frivolous, and to be like a real healed person, I guess I needed to do something serious with my life. And that's how I thought about it. And I got a degree in communication and studied abroad and did all the things and whatever. And then somebody asked me to teach like some little kid classes at a rec studio, and ended up teaching there for 9 years. And that was my kind of connection to the dance world through then. I slowly started taking classes here and there. I started aerial acrobatics kind of recreationally, but I really had to overcome this feeling that like, because I didn't believe that I was talented enough to go professional, that it was somehow worth my time and money to dedicate to it. Because I think I thought for me, that was frivolous because real grown-up people don't do that. And I started to just be around more people. Like I remember in my little aerial studio, they had like a showcase, and all these adult people that I knew were like planning to do this showcase. And I was like, oh my God, like I can't imagine just spending all this time and money for this little showcase. And it was such a judgmental place because I was in such a bitter place for not allowing myself to have that joy just because. And so, yeah, like I eventually overcame that, and I started to realize, well, maybe I could still do this, and maybe I could become talented, and maybe I could do this. And that started to kind of be in my mind. And then when I turned 30, I had like a total breakdown because I was in this horrible situation and I ended up leaving. And I think in leaving my ex-husband, I thought I was losing like a bad relationship. I didn't know how many other things would kind of come falling apart with that. But some of it was just self-judgment kind of goes away. It's like, well, I don't have to be some serious person or I don't have to be this whatever I thought I had to be. That didn't work out for me. So I'm just going to do whatever I want.
Yeah.
And that's when I started like really kind of going and like taking a bunch of classes, and I quit teaching all these dance studios that were taking up all this time, and just spent time improving my own craft because I wanted to. And then because I love a big goal, I was like, I want to go on Broadway and I'm going to start auditioning, and it became this kind of bigger thing.
There's so many things in that that I think are beautiful and resonate with me, and I'm sure a lot of people listening, like the first being that you had so much passion even as a small child, that like you remember that feeling of like crying on your mom's lap of like, I'm never be a professional like that, and like wanting it so badly, because I think a lot of adults that dance now later in life, they had that feeling of really wanting it as a child, but for whatever reason, they it didn't get to happen for them. But there was that like really deep passion. And it's cool to see how through different ways life has a way of bringing it back around if it's something that you really, really love. And it's interesting hearing how, tied in with your divorce and like something really big happening in your life being a catalyst, because I think that's also a common thread for a lot of adults is like,
I talk to a lot of people where that's a common thread. I'm curious, like, what exactly that is. I don't know if that's like when you go through something big, you need the movement to kind of like have the catharsis, or if there's some other element to it as well.
yeah,
Self-discovery and that kind of like, well, the life I'd planned and the future I had in my mind doesn't exist anymore. So I got to start from square one. And there's something really beautiful about starting from the square where you were when you knew yourself so well, you didn't care how unrealistic the goal was.
yeah. Yeah, it's like I think the things that we're most passionate about as children are probably the truest indicator of like what we really love. And I think a lot of adults, we lose that. And a lot of times it's something creative specifically. There's a lot of people that love to dance or to draw or to sing. And it's like, it seems like it tends to be the creative things that get stripped away in all the cares of adults' life. And I many times it just takes like a big shakeup to bring us back. It's amazing like what that's looked like for you and like all the things that you're doing now. Will you share a little bit about like what you're doing now? Because you share on your social media about and you mentioned teaching, and I've seen on your Instagram that you're also taking classes now
Yeah.
as a university student. So will you kind of share like what things are that are going on in your life actively right now?
Yeah. So, like professionally, people ask me this all the time, and I try to share it as much as I can. That I'm a full-time senior lecturer at the University of Kentucky. So I've been there for since 2014, with one interlude year where I wasn't there. I haven't been full-time the entire time. I was like a TA, and I got my doctorate, and like, but yeah. So I've been on staff there forever. And it's a very flexible job. And it's also, I teach communication. So there's a lot of tie in with like creative work, I guess. So I do that. And then I'm a freelance performer, I guess. So I perform with several companies here in the area. I perform occasionally with companies based out of New York with like small event kind of stuff. And then like concert dance, and aerial acrobatics. And then recently, yeah, I've been going back and forth from New York, auditioning for Broadway. I'm going to Chicago this weekend to audition for The Lion King. So I'm excited about that. And I started college classes again this fall because as a faculty, I can take class for free. But it's been really fun. Like I'm taking jazz 3 and ballet 3, and I have to write little papers and I have to do little discussion boards. And like I'm in class with all these 21, 22-year-olds. And it's just, yeah, it's just a good time for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing all the things that you're doing and like so inspiring. And I wanted to talk today specifically about the topic of regret of if I only started earlier, because a lot of adults experience this. And you had posted a reel on social media talking about this. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to talk about this so bad on the podcast because I feel like it's just such a relatable thing for adult dancers and like you specifically, because like you just mentioned, you're in classes with people who are younger. I know you take classes
Yeah.
when you go to New York, which I'm
Yeah.
imagining is probably a lot of people that are in their early 20s. And so and I think even for a lot of adults, if we take classes at studios where they have like a pre-professional program or just open classes, there can be this amplified feeling of like, oh, if I'd only started earlier, would I be better? Like, what could I have done? How far could I have gone? And so I'm curious what do you think makes that such like a common feeling among adults? Because I know you've talked very openly on your social media about like also experiencing that.
I think there's a few things. I think one is we live in this culture that tells you if you are going to be creative, you have to be good at it. You have to. You're not allowed to be a bad singer. You're not allowed to be a bad drummer. You're not allowed to be a bad ballet dancer. You have to be good at it. And if you're a kid, you can kind of get away with not being good at it for a short period of time. But you better get good at it, or you should switch your sport, or you should switch to something else to do something that you are good at, that you are naturally talented at. And I think that really is stupid. But that's the world that we live in, is that because I believe at our core, we are creative beings. I think that's something that is innate to human beings. Why would we strip ourselves of the thing that makes us human every day and say that this is only reserved for the, Mikhail Baryshnikovs and the Taylor Swifts and the, whoever. They're the only ones who get to be creative because they're the only ones that are good at it. But those people are audacious. Like, there was a time they probably weren't that good at it. And there are times that they produce things that you're like, what? I don't like it. And that you might not think it's good, but they just keep putting themselves out there. And I think we are so scared, especially as adults, to be wrong because we're also told you can't be a beginner at something. It's somehow shameful for you to be the age that you are and to be bad at something. And I think that holds you back. I mean, it it definitely held me back. Um, we get in our own way, like so much because we're like, well, I don't want to be in the room with like people that are better than me or people that are younger and better than me because that's like, I mean, that's a cancel out combo right there. It's like if you're younger and better. But I just kind of had to, I mean, it's taken me a few years to get past some of that thinking. And yeah, I mean, sometimes I look, dang, like if I were in these classes and I was 18 or 19, but also like they're wrestling with the same questions that I was wrestling with when I was 18 or 19. And I have the confidence now to be like, no, I have the answer because I lived my 20s and I lived, this life. And you just kind of get to, if you just own where you're at, I think you have so much power.
And I think even something you mentioned earlier about, when you were kind of on the outside looking in and seeing people that were doing the adult dance thing and almost feeling a little bit like judgmental of it because you were in a place where like you were still holding back. And I think that's a really common experience for
Mhm.
a lot of adults just in general. Like we might at first feel kind of like, oh no, but it's because we're suppressing something in
Yes.
ourselves that we actually want to do. I remember even when I was very first kind of getting exposed to the idea of like adults really going hard in ballet.
Yeah.
And there was this part of me that was a little bit like, isn't that a little bit cringy though, to try to like take it so seriously? And, looking back now, it's like it's exactly what you said. It's like I wasn't free enough in myself at that point to let myself just love something without being good at it, without being a
Yeah.
professional, without and so like that insecurity was kind of being projected onto the whole
Yeah.
thing. And so I think that's a really common thing for adults, and I'm sure a lot of people listening will even have had experiences of telling someone like, "Oh, I do, ballet," and then being kind of like, "What?" And I think I
Oh,
always have to
yeah.
remind myself that like, well, they probably just haven't found their own freedom yet.
Yeah, I read The Artist's Way this summer. I'd never read it before. And she talks a lot about this kind of concept of like, if you are stuck yourself creatively, you are bitter to everybody else who is trying. And that was really enlightening to me, not only to where I was at, maybe, and I don't think I was like horrifically bitter or anything, but
Yeah.
I can see that in my past version of myself. And I can also see it in some of the people that have been around me or were around me. And it's also helpful when sometimes I get comments online because if you post your actual journey, sometimes people are mean. And every time I see that, I'm like, well, that sounds to me like you feel stuck and you're upset that I have tried to put something out there and you're not willing. And
Yeah.
so that says more about you than it says about me.
Yeah, because I think it challenges the narrative that we can all tend to have in our own head of, "I couldn't do that," and so when you
Yes.
see someone doing it, it kind of, like, pushes on an
Yes.
insecurity a little bit because I've built up this narrative in my mind of, like, "That's impossible, that's never gonna happen," and then to see someone doing it, you have to kind of reckon with your own limitations that you've put on
Yeah.
yourself. One of the things I loved in this topic that you spoke about online was the idea of reframing starting late as instead of regret or frustration, framing it as gratitude for all the life experiences and maturity that we bring to the table as adults. So, wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and what that shift has looked like for you.
I think for me, this is more about owning my journey rather than, well, this is what I should have done or what I was supposed to do or what other people did. It's just like, no, this is just a continuation of my journey. And this is just what it's looked like for me. I have lived real life experience that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And that just informs me differently. Like, in really practical ways, something my friends and I had talk about is like, and this is such a lovely compliment my friend gave me. She said, I don't know anybody that makes more eye contact with the audience, especially when they're doing aerial, than you. But the reason I do that, and a lot of people don't, is because I spent the last 10 years making eye contact at the front of the room of a classroom full of 25 students who I'm hoping are looking at me and not their phone. And so, but that means that like when I go into a space or an audition or something like that, like I have that and that serves me. I have to also acknowledge that, and I can acknowledge things without judgment, good or bad. I can say, well, this is just something that I learned, and this is how I'm applying it now. There are other things that it's like I have an immense number of bad habits I've been humbled by being back in the college classroom with as a dancer, where no one has really watched what I've been doing for the last like however many years. Like you get accepted or you get cut, you get cast or you get cut. And maybe somebody gives me like a tip here or there or something. But like I took a ballet exam 2 weeks ago and she filmed the exam. It's 3 combinations. Filmed the exam. I got a B. And I'm like, I mean, I've been in school forever. So this is like, E. But also, she gave me like 30 minutes of video feedback where she went through my combinations and looked at like what's happening with the alignment. Why am I falling out of my pirouette? Well, what's happening here? Your arm is too high here. Like that is such valuable stuff I can acknowledge without judgment. And so being able to own my journey and say, well, this is just where I'm at. I'm not gonna, if I live in the past and say, oh, I wish I'd done this, I wish I'd done that, I'm spending so much energy with choice I can't undo. But if I put that energy now, I can say, wow, well, like I have all these things to offer, and that's great. And I can figure out how to use those things in more creative ways. And I can also say, yep, I have these things to work on. And I don't have to put judgment on it like, well, I should have known these things because I have my journey and my journey is my journey and it is what it is. Another student has their own journey, they're on their own path, and who knows what that's going to be for them. And I can just focus on right here, right now, what do I want to improve, not how do I compare to the other students in the room or where I think I should be or what I think I wish I could have would have done. which I can't
Yeah.
change.
I would love to hear too how this kind of ties in even to artistry for you as someone who is pursuing performing and even just in the classroom. But, I know a lot of adults there's starting to be more opportunities for people to have performing experiences, even, in like their local nutcracker and things like that. And I think the artistry part is such an interesting facet of like the adult ballet journey and what you can
Mhm.
bring. So I would love to hear from your perspective how you feel like coming back to dance later has even shaped the artistry that you bring into the classroom, into performing.
I mean, I think as an adult coming back on stage, it was a transformative experience because I got to be somebody on stage that I wanted to be and not the person whose life I was really living.
Mhm.
And I see that a lot specifically in community theater, where it's like you see all these people and they are coming for some crazy, wild backstories, but there's something really transformative about being on stage as somebody else because it's not somebody else, it's the version of you you might want to be for that moment. And for me, that was like finding my humor again and finding like this joyous person inside that I had lost.
Mhm.
And I think that, of course, has transformed my artistry. Like the life that you live outside of the walls of the studio, that gives you a perspective on a piece of work, whether that is, a balancing choreography that's like highly musical and there's absolutely no story at all, or something that you create yourself, or a play that you're in. And I think I said this in a reel, but I see very, very often teachers will stop a class and say, I am not seeing anyone perform this. And I know they're not talking about me because sometimes they'll call me out, but I also know my strength. Like I'm performing out. I probably got steps wrong, but you're not going to see me not smiling or not like I am living in it. But I don't see that always from these really well technically trained students. And it's because the life they've lived has been in the walls of the studio. It's been on competition stage. It has been so curated for them. And that's not to say that they haven't lived a life, like I'd lived a life at 18 and whatever. Um, but not the same life I've lived now. And I don't have the same perspective on it that I have
Mhm.
now to be able to use it in a way that's productive, to be able to live into it.
Yeah.
And so, definitely in that way, it's been highly transformative. I think every adult should have the opportunity to get on stage, even for every person should, because it is such a transformative experience to be able to say, I deserve to take up space in this moment and have somebody watch me do it and be proud of me. I like, wow, like that is such a simple concept, but it's actually so profound. Um,
Yeah.
I've decided recently that I'm gonna do my own show, and I've, like, written the whole thing and, like, it's a whole thing.
I love that.
But you think, like, "Oh my god, you're gonna do a one-woman show? Because that's what I think. That's what I would think sometimes, like, "Oh, one-woman show? That can be really cringy. That could be really bad. We don't know." Um, and it feels so indulgent to have people to invite a bunch of people to come see just me on stage.
Yeah.
Um, but I think there's something really cool about taking a level of ownership that we often think of as ego and just saying, actually, everybody deserves to have this moment where somebody looks at what they're doing and sees them.
Yeah, and I think the beauty of it is, like, it helps set other people free in a way, like, kinda what we
Yeah,
were talking about
yeah.
earlier is I think, like, seeing someone do something like a one-woman show where you're thinking, like, "Are people gonna maybe think this is cringy or something?" But the people that come and watch, it's probably gonna, like, really set them free to think, "Oh my gosh, this is someone who's doing something really brave, and maybe I could do something brave too," So I
Oh,
think that's a
exactly.
really powerful part of performing, especially for adult ballet dancers where maybe the technical part or the technique isn't at the same level as, a professional dancer, but the performing becomes about something so much bigger and, in my opinion, better than that because it becomes about sharing
from a really authentic place and like sharing the emotional part of it and the artistry part of it and less about the technical standard, that I think can sometimes make things feel a little bit flat.
Today's episode is sponsored by Line Fitness by Allie. As dancers, we all want to feel capable in our bodies, to jump with power, turn with ease, and move through class with stability and grace. Dancer Strong was created to help you get there. It's a comprehensive online platform with on-demand strength, stretch, and mobility classes, plus live Zoom sessions each week. Each workout is designed specifically for adult dancers, so the progress you make shows up where it matters the most, in the studio. I've personally been using Dancer Strong for the past year, and the results have been amazing. My stamina has improved, my back pain has disappeared, and I've been able to increase my point training while remaining injury-free through summer intensives and workshops. All the things that matter most to me as an adult dancer. If your goals for the new year include stronger jumps, higher extensions, or cleaner pirouettes, Dancer Strong is the tool you've been looking for. You can visit dancerstrongprograms.com and use the code AFTERCLASS for $5 off your purchase of a course or membership. That's dancerstrongprograms.com, code AFTERCLASS. Head into the new year ready to achieve your best dancing yet.
I'd also love to go back to something that you mentioned because this is something that I really personally struggle with. And I'm like, tell me your secrets, because you mentioned in class that you perform and that you love going full out in the classroom. And that's something that I really struggle with. And I know I'm not the only one, even just from the other adults I take class with. Like, that's a constant critique that a lot of us get. Smile, like, perform it, live it. And I would love to hear how that developed for you and if that was a process that you had to work on. And if so, how did you work on it?
I do think I have honed this through teaching specifically, which is I learned if you start judging yourself or thinking outside your body about what is happening while you're doing something, it is going to fail. Like if I'm teaching in a class and I start thinking, wait, are they judging me? What are they laughing about in the back row? Like, what is this? Blah, blah, blah. Your inner monologue is not connected to what you're talking about anymore. And you cannot show up authentically because your spirit is living in a different place than your body. And it's always come a bit easier for me in dance, I think, is like something about the music and something about letting myself have the kind of catharsis and like emotional experience of being in the class without these kind of other goals sometimes allows me to show up as a really authentic version of myself that didn't always happen in other areas of my life. Now, that said, I don't show up as that version of myself in Petit Allegro specifically. And that is because my judgment of what's happening and my fear of what's to come or what happens next or where am I moving? And my brain is just thinking about all these things. But I've learned that if I can convince myself to trust that I will know it when it comes, and if I don't, it's okay, then I have a much better shot at doing it. If you can really give yourself to something, you'd be surprised what you can accomplish. But if you go into it thinking, well, I don't know if I remember the combination, or, well, I really have to think about this and that, you can't perform it. I think what I'm saying is you have to have times where you've decided the goal of this combination is for me to get it technically proficient. But you also need to set goals for yourself in the classroom to say, my goal today, or maybe it's for an entire class, my goal today is to go in and just like live this class. But yeah, no, I do, like there are places where I struggle with that, and that spot is specifically Petit Allegro.
So funny, that is my arch nemesis in ballet life.
I did myself a huge disservice the last few years. I would take drop-in classes at Lexington Ballet, and they were mostly at an intermediate level, which is perfectly fine, but the Petit Allegro was not challenging enough for me to have enough weight transfer. And then when I would go take professional classes in New York, I knew that I was going to embarrass myself, so I wouldn't go across the floor for that section because I didn't want to run into anybody who's like, legitimately like working as a professional dancer in New York City and like probably was a former prima ballerina.
I know it's always the temptation. Like I definitely did that when I was first coming back.
Yeah.
Those things that I was like, oh, I'm just going to sit that one out. And then you realize there is no way past it except through it. I love how you explained about being out of yourself and how, like, when you step out of yourself, you're not able to really be present in what's happening. Because I've never heard it explained like that. And it makes so much sense. And I think that that's a really common experience. Like, I know I do that in pretty much every single class I take. I almost feel like I'm watching myself from the point of view of the teacher
Yeah.
instead of being in it and
Yeah.
enjoying it and living it. And so I think that that's just like such a great way to understand what's happening and why it doesn't work when you're wanting to actually be able to perform to a degree. Like, even just in class, like, you want to be able to perform it and enjoy it, especially if you're someone who's doing it
Yeah.
recreationally with no intention of performing. Like, the main goal then is like enjoying it at the very least. And
Yeah.
you enjoy it so much more when you are inhabiting your own body versus hovering above yourself with judgment.
Man, and you learn it so much faster.
Yeah.
Like, I've started doing this. I learned this from a teacher in New York. He said, never mark. Don't mark. Go full out every time. And if you're not going to go full out, then use your arms and listen to the music. And he had this his name's Tommy Scrivens. He's an amazing teacher. Beautiful way of talking about taking up space. Like, if you're going to learn, you need to take up space. If you just watch or you make yourself small to learn, how do you think you're going to show up when you actually do it? It's going to be a small, hesitant, I'm thinking about it version versus if you go full out the whole time the teacher's talking, it's in your body and you're doing it without judgment the first time. So then when you go to do it, you're just doing it. You're not doing it with judgment. Now, if I could apply that to some of my tricky areas, that'd be great.
No, that's such a great lesson, though. I'm taking that for myself, even going into class with the intention of taking up more space and like being okay with that, because I think I definitely am someone who tends to do that and to kind of like shrink into themselves. And I'm like, marking small, then it ends up,
Yeah.
doing it small. Like, I have a really hard time letting myself go and be free.
I think it really helped me that, like, one of my goals in coming back was to unleash myself from the small cage I had put myself in. As a person. And so then every single class, that was my intention, was to kind of like find this bigger version of myself. Um, I learned I had to trust myself, that I knew what I was doing. Because a couple of years ago, it happened a couple different times on the same day. It's like I was so concerned with trying to watch everybody else to make sure that I was with them and that I was doing the right combination, that I was in a ballet class that morning, and I remember it was Petit Allegro. The people around me went the wrong way, and I knew the right way to go. And I was like, oh, well, that happened like a few other times that same day. Like, I was in an audition, and it was like, I need to stop watching what everybody else is doing and just dance this dance and know that I learned it in the exact same amount of time as they learned it. And I don't have to look at somebody else to tell me what to do. I'm going to trust that I know it. And if something bad happens, something bad happens. But like, I think so often we don't trust ourselves with it.
It's like a deeper issue that surfaces of like lack of self-trust. And it is funny. I actually had a teacher say to me not too long ago, it's specifically in regard to Petit Allegro. And she had me come to the front of the room, not because I was doing it well, but because she just wanted to challenge me and had us all do it again. And she was like, you did it better when you didn't have anyone to watch and you trusted yourself. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, life lesson in that. So,
Yeah.
it is funny how sometimes what holds us back is looking around at what everyone else is doing. So I would love if you would take us into the setting of being in a class in New York, because you were talking about being in a situation where you're like in a ballet class and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to do it wrong, and like run into a professional. And like, I think a lot of adults feel that way in their their version of that, where they
Yeah.
might be an open class and there's really advanced dancers and they're like, I don't know if I want to go across the floor right now because there's people in this group that are really good and I don't want to get in their way and all that stuff. And so I'm curious, like when you are in a moment like that, how do you reframe your mindset to keep going in that class and like be successful in that class when that feeling of being behind or whatever it is kind of starts to creep in?
Yeah, so I really struggled with this specifically. I did the Steps on Broadway Summer Conservatory a couple of years ago, and I was 31. And I remember I was like, I had all this acne from being in the program because you're there like, 9, 10 hours of class. And I just remember thinking, I can't be the oldest and the ugliest and worst. Like, I can't be all these things. And I knew that it wasn't true, but these are like your invasive thoughts. And I really had a hard time, especially because I wanted to stand at the back of the room, even though I don't learn that. You can't learn the best at the back of the room. You learn the best at the front when you're right there behind the teacher. You can see what they're doing. But I just felt like all these other students, well, they're gonna go off and they're gonna be real professionals, and I'm just here because I'm having like a midlife crisis, basically. But I started to tell myself I paid the same price to be here as anybody else. I wrote an essay and I got in and I submitted the same materials that everybody else in this room submitted to be here, and I'm here. So I deserve to take up the exact same amount of space, not more, but not less than anybody else around me because I paid that price to be here. And it's not different than the person next to me. Somebody told me, we pick you and you deserve to be here. And I needed to believe that. And even if that's just the price tag on your class, you paid for that spot and you didn't pay less money for that spot than somebody who's better than you or just trained longer than you or any of that. I will also say back to the petit allegro, there is that element in ballet specifically where there's a high level of etiquette. And this was very specific scenario where I was taking, it is called professional level class. And in New York, professional level class means that you have been a working professional for multiple years and you are in this class to hone your skill. So there really are people, I mean, some of them are older, but there are people that are like, they just got off the Cats tour or they were previously a professional, like whatever. And there are times where I'm like I had a teacher say, well, if you're going across this floor, you better know what you're doing. And so, but that is specific to that level of class.
So for someone who is listening who feels that ache, I wish I'd started sooner because I think like we've talked about that is a very common thing for adults. What would you say to them about how they view their timing in life?
I think about this one, I know people say everything happens for a reason. I'm like, I guess like every action has its equal opposite reaction. Sometimes the actions are stupid and the reactions are stupid. But what I do believe is that you can make everything meaningful by the way that you choose to view it. And I view myself as a narrator in my story rather than just a character. Because I think if you view yourself as a character, then you just have to deal with the things that happen to you. You become this kind of passive player. But if you're the narrator, you get to decide what's the hero's journey you're going on. And is this the plot point where you give up? Or is this the plot point where, well, man, like you always wanted to be a dancer, but your mom was a waitress and she couldn't afford it. And then you had to move to live with your dad and there wasn't a blah, blah, blah. And now you've reclaimed this piece of yourself and you're doing this thing and you're inspiring other people. And like, that's such a different story than getting wrapped up in the end of my story wasn't that I quit because I had an eating disorder. I quit and I healed and I came back and I decided that my story wasn't over. And I get to decide when is the story over. And that's such a powerful tool.
Yeah.
And so I'm a little bit of a romantic in the way that always am out here thinking about what's the story. And I tell my students, I do stuff for the plot. Like I will just straight up, I will do it for the plot. I want it to be an interesting story to tell. So the interesting story to tell doesn't end with, well, and then I got a job and I just never tried again. That's not interesting. It's far more interesting to try and fail than to not try. And I think that helps me with regret. It helps me with failure a lot. And that's something I trained in the classroom. Like I teach communication, so I teach storytelling. So I'm always like, okay, well, how do you make it a story? What is the beginning, middle, and end? And that's what I'm always asking of my students. And so then I'm always thinking about what stories am I going to tell in the classroom? And I remember a couple of different instances where the reason I pushed through was because it's a good story. It's a better story if I keep trying and I get a different outcome. So like couple years ago when I first started this kind of like Broadway journey, I decided to audition for Six at an open call in Nashville. And my friend and I drove down there. I had auditioned for another open call. And I kind of thought I knew what was going to happen, but it was wild. Like we showed up at 8 a.m. and I was like number 343 to be seen that day. It was insane. I have never been to another audition like it, and I hope never to again. We were there. I was there until 4:30 is when I got called in to sing. And it was singing only. I go in, I sang Good For You by Olivia Rodrigo. I got to the chorus and forgot the words. And this is mortifying. And they were like, it's okay. You good. Like, you drove a long way. Like, where are you from? They pumped me up. They're like, you can start over. I start over. I start singing the song, get to the same spot, hit my big note, forget the words again. Having it the second time. They were like, do you want to start over? And I was like, yes, I would. I sang the song all the way through it. If I'd done it the first time, I would have been thrilled. And I mean, I was like beside myself that this had happened. Like it was a mortifying experience. They were so kind about it. They never called me back. But I started to think to myself, how am I going to tell this story to my students? Because I told them that I was going. And I went back on Monday and I told them these are the 5 mistakes I made that made me lose my place in my song. But because I think like that, I'm not thinking about this is the end. I'm thinking about what's the full story I'm telling. Well, I'm telling a story about how these are the 5 things that I learned from this failure and how am I going to change it next time? And because I'm always thinking about that, then I don't have room to think about regret. I can think about consequences, like there are negative consequences that happen, but I don't have to live in them.
Well, I love that too, because even in like the micro story within the story of the audition itself, you kept going until you did do it all the way through. And I think so many of us, like myself included, would have messed up the first time and been like, I'm out. Like, I am out. I can't. And like the fact that you pushed so that the end of that even little story was finishing the song. Like, damn straight. And like, I think it speaks to the power of that mindset. How do I want this to end? Like, how do I want to tell this story? And I think when you frame it like that, it gives such a different perspective. It gives such like a different energy to what you do, because like that energy totally comes across even in your social media. It's like you project that energy of like, I'm gonna have a great story to tell, and it like comes out as this courageousness that takes risks. It's so cool to hear that that's the thought process for you, because I think it's like a really, really beautiful and cool way to even just frame your entire life, like let alone your dance journey, but like your entire life, thinking of how do I want this to play out? When I'm standing at the end of my life, what do I want to look back and think, was this like an awesome book, or was this a book that's just kind of sad?
Well, and that's kind of how I came back, because I got to this point where I was like, do I want to get to the end of my life and wish that I'd tried? And I might as well start now, because it's not too late to start.
Thank you so much. Where can people connect with you on Instagram?
At Circus Mary, and it's Mary like Merry Christmas.
And I'll also link Mary's information in the show notes so that you can go follow her on Instagram. So thank you so much for being with us today, Mary. It was really, really fun.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to support the show, you can join the after-class Corps de Ballet for just $3 a month through the listener support feature. It really helps keep the podcast going, and as a member, you'll even get a special shout-out in future episodes. All the links mentioned in this episode, including the link to join the Corps, are included in the show notes. See you next week after class!